Imagine being the most powerful man in the world, only to suddenly find enemies crashing through your borders from every direction. That's exactly what happened to Napoleon Bonaparte in early 1814. After losing hundreds of thousands of soldiers in Russia, he now faced an impossible challenge: defend France with an exhausted army made up mostly of teenage boys against enemies 6 times larger than his own force. But here's the shocking twist. Instead of retreating or giving up, Napoleon pulled off one of the most brilliant maneuvers in military history. In just 6 days, he defeated 4 separate enemy armies and reminded the world why he was called a military genius. Yet even this dazzling victory could not save his collapsing empire. Let's find out what really happened. It's January 1814, and Napoleon's empire is on the brink. Just months earlier, the massive Battle of Nations at Leipzig had shattered his main army. Almost 300,000 men were lost, with another 100,000 cut off inside German cities. By the time Napoleon stumbled back across the Rhine into France, he had only about 70,000 soldiers left from what was once the most powerful army in the world. Now his nightmare truly begins. More than 400,000 enemy soldiers from Britain, Austria, Prussia, Sweden, and Russia pour into France from 3 different directions. The largest force, over 150,000 men under Prince Schwarzenberg, drives in from the east. Field Marshal Blücher brings more than 70,000 from the north. Smaller armies spread across the countryside, all converging on Paris. Napoleon, meanwhile, can gather only 70,000 men to defend a frontier stretching from Strasbourg all the way to the North Sea. 6-to-1 odds against him. Imagine trying to fight 6 opponents at once. To make matters worse, many of his soldiers are not hardened veterans. They are known as the Marie Louises, teenage conscripts, some as young as 14, barely 5 feet tall. Most had just 2 weeks of training before being thrown into the fire. They often lacked proper uniforms or even enough weapons. One young recruit famously told Marshal Marmont, "I could shoot as well as anyone else, if only I had someone to load my gun." Napoleon himself admitted that his new young guard simply melted away under fire, as so many of these brave children died in battle. France was literally sending its sons into war because no one else was left. Most people thought Napoleon should retreat and defend Paris directly, but he saw something his enemies didn't. They had made a critical mistake. By late January, Napoleon had already suffered another setback at La Rosière, where 100,000 allies smashed through his 40,000 men. Things looked hopeless until Field Marshal Blücher decided he was done coordinating with the slow Austrian army. Looking for better supplies and shelter in the brutal winter, Blücher marched his men away. This split the Allied armies apart, exactly the opportunity Napoleon had been waiting for. He instantly abandoned his retreat, gathered 30,000 men and 120 cannons, and hurled them toward Blücher's scattered forces. His plan was simple, but brilliant. Strike each enemy corps separately before they could reunite, like fighting opponents one by one in a game instead of letting them gang up at the same time. Napoleon called this his central position strategy. Rather than facing all enemies at once, he used France's excellent road network to move his smaller army rapidly between widely spread enemy forces. Speed became his deadliest weapon. And this gamble worked largely because the Allied commanders hated each other almost as much as they hated Napoleon. Austria wanted peace and was even willing to leave Napoleon on the throne. Russia wanted nothing less than his total destruction. Their lack of unity gave him the opening. From February 10th to 14th, 1814, Napoleon struck like lightning. In just 6 days, he won 4 battles in a row, like a chess master executing flawless moves. The first clash came at Champaubert. Napoleon's 30,000 men smashed into a small Russian detachment of just 4,000. He crushed them, killing or capturing almost all and even seizing their general, while losing only about 200 French troops. The next day, at Montmirail, he faced 39,000 men with only 25,000 of his own. Once again, he used speed and precision to hit weak points, routing them and inflicting 4,000 losses. On the third day, at Chateau-Thierry, he pressed the retreating Russians and Prussians across a river. The Allies lost another 4,000 men, while the French suffered only about 600 casualties. Finally, at Vauchamps, the Prussians tried to ambush Napoleon, but he anticipated the move, turned on them, and unleashed his cavalry. French horsemen charged, broke their lines, and chased them down across the frozen fields. The Allies lost about 10,000 men, compared to just 600 French. In total, during those 6 furious days, Napoleon's 30,000 soldiers had defeated nearly 60,000 enemies, while losing only around 4,000 themselves. A breathtaking ratio, almost 10 enemies for every French casualty. Why did Napoleon succeed? First, speed. His army marched long distances through freezing mud, allowing him to surprise enemies and strike exactly where he wanted. Second, terrain. He carefully chose flat ground perfect for his horsemen to deliver crushing charges. Third, enemy mistakes. The Allies spread their forces too thin and failed to coordinate, letting Napoleon strike them piecemeal. And finally, combined arms. Napoleon used infantry, artillery, and cavalry together, holding the enemy in place, blasting holes with cannons, then unleashing cavalry to finish the job.
Yet despite these dazzling victories, the campaign could not save his empire. The first problem was sheer numbers. The Allies still had hundreds of thousands of men, far more than Napoleon could ever replace. The second problem was geography. While Napoleon fought in the countryside, other enemy columns marched directly toward Paris. The third problem was politics. On March 30th, 1814, Paris surrendered after just 1 day of resistance. And even worse, Napoleon's own marshals refused to keep fighting. One, Marshal Marmont, even surrendered his entire army. And finally, war fatigue. After 20 years of endless conflict, the French people and even the soldiers were exhausted. They wanted peace, not more brilliant battles. No matter how clever Napoleon was, he could not win against a nation that no longer had the will to fight. So in the end, Napoleon's 6-day triumph was his last blaze of glory, a reminder of his genius, but also of the limits of one man against the tide of history.